Welcome, everybody. Thank you for logging in and joining us for the next webinar, Lunch and Learn, in our virtual series. Today, I'm April Rozzo. If you don't know me already, one of our Florida Cancer Specialists dietitians. And we are going to talk about the gut microbiome today. We're going to talk about what it is, if it can influence our health, how diet might play a role. And I will say this at the beginning, and then I will also remind people at the end. Angie Mathewson, one of our other dietitians, is on the call with us today. She has written 3 of our wellness newsletters on the topic of the gut microbiome. So I'm going to call her our resident expert. I should have had her do this talk. But Angie, please feel free to chime in if I am missing something or if you have something to add. And at the end, if we have questions, you know, I did some research. I used your wellness newsletters, but feel free to add as we go.
I will do my best. And we just noticed that the last one I did was actually over 1.5 years ago. So I'm thinking this will be a good prompt to revisit. And the next newsletter will come out in 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm thinking we'll do gut microbiome and kind of jump off on what the questions are today.
Excellent. All right. So that being said, let's get into it. So what is it? What is the gut microbiome? So there are trillions of microorganisms in your body, most of which are found in the gut. Those microorganisms are called microbiota or microbes. There are thousands of different species, including bacteria, which we're probably the most familiar with, fungi, parasites, viruses. They are unique to each of us, to each individual. And lots of different influences can change or alter your gut microbiome. So in early life, the microbiome is kind of initiated with the microorganisms in the birth canal. And then with the introduction of mom's milk or formula, the introduction of solid foods. And then as we go through life, the environment and your diet can also change the composition of your microbiome. And drug therapies like medications, antibiotics, and your intestinal pH can have an effect on the types of microorganisms that are in that microbiome. It has lots of different functions. Microbes can be symbiotic, where the human, the host, us, and the microbes both benefit, or in less frequent situations or in smaller numbers, potentially pathogenic or harmful. But on the beneficial side, these microbes have been linked to stimulating the immune system and certain functions within the immune cells, producing B vitamins, vitamin K, and some amino acids, which are the building blocks for proteins. They aid in the digestion of our complex carbohydrates, so fruits and vegetables and whole grains in the large intestine. The fermentation of that undigestible fiber, which is also called prebiotics. We're going to get into this in a little bit more detail down the road here. But the fermentation of that fiber creates short chain fatty acids that may help prevent some chronic diseases like certain types of cancers and bowel disorders like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. Those microbes also help protect against pathogenic organisms that are sometimes found in contaminated food or water. And probably what we most know the gut microbiome, the good bacteria in our gut for, is that they prevent the overgrowth of harmful bacteria in the intestines. What we have found with the research, and I will probably say this 5 more times in the next 20 minutes, that Research for this is ongoing. There is a lot of unknown about the gut microbiome. There is a lot being studied. But at this point, the research is indicating that a more diverse microbiome, so more variety in those microorganisms, seems to be more beneficial. And microbiomes seem to differ between groups of lean individuals with more muscle mass, less body fat. Those individuals largely seem to have a more diverse microbiome, and obese individuals seem to have a less diverse microbiome. Imbalances in the microbiome have been linked to bowel disorders, like we mentioned earlier. So IBD or IBS, diabetes, some of the genetic tendencies towards allergic diseases like asthma and eczema, and some autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis. So before we jump into the diet, again, talking about the research, it is important to note that human studies in any kind of nutrition or diet topic are hard. They're difficult. There are a lot of limitations and challenges to human studies of anything, but particularly of nutrition and diet. And so in studying the gut microbiome, human studies are based on stool samples. And one of the limitations is that microbes vary widely across the whole GI tract. So you kind of get these little micro colonies or micro environments. So you have a different kind of diverse population of microorganisms, maybe in the small intestine versus the large intestine. And so we're a little bit limited because we're just taking those stool samples at the end. Also, diet is hard to control in human participants. Studies that have people in a lab and feed them a strict diet or specific foods are very expensive trials. Most of the time people go home, they eat their regular diet, and it's very hard to control for the variations. So bearing that in mind, a lot of the information that we have is from studies in mice. And moving that into the role of diet, some studies have found in mice decreased diversity of those microorganisms with low fiber diets. So mice were changed from a high fiber diet to a low fiber diet. The diversity of the microbiome decreased. And what they also found was that those mice with a less diverse population passed that trait off to their offspring, passed it on to their offspring. Now, they did see that resuming a high fiber diet improved diversity, but not easily. It was challenging. It took time to actually improve that microbiome. So that being said, we know that fiber intake affects the type and the amount of the microbiota in the gut. That fiber definitely influences the gut microbiome. We mentioned before that those microbes help digest complex carbohydrates. So what's actually happening is that enzymes from the microbes in the colon break down and ferment the fiber, the undigestible dietary fiber. That dietary fiber, the foods that contain that dietary fiber are called prebiotics, and we're going to talk more about those. But from that fermentation, the resulting short chain fatty acids actually lower the colon pH. And that can help limit the growth of certain harmful bacteria, such as Clostridium difficile, also known as C. diff. And there is a lot of research examining short chain fatty acid effects, not only on C. diff and the growth of other harmful bacteria, but on immune cell activity, blood glucose levels to help regulate blood sugar, and on cholesterol. So we mentioned the prebiotics. You can get those from food, and that's always what we prefer, is that you try to get these nutrients from food. And so the biggest source of prebiotics are going to be fruits, vegetables, beans or legumes, and whole grains. So think about what we said. We said prebiotics are dietary fiber or complex carbohydrates. Though this is where your fiber comes from in your diet, your plant-based foods. The biggest sources of prebiotics within that group are going to be garlic and onions, asparagus, bananas, Jerusalem artichokes, also known as sunchokes, and barley or wheat. You can get prebiotics in supplement form. You'll see ingredients like inulin, pectin, lignans, or fructooligosaccharides. I highly recommend using the abbreviation so that you don't have to pronounce that. The danger with supplements, and I shouldn't say danger, but the caution with supplements is that if you introduce too much fiber into your gut at one time, which is very possible with supplements, high fiber intake can cause some increased gas production and bloating, especially if your gut is not used to it. So introducing too much too quickly could cause a lot of those symptoms. And then you're going to come back and you're going to yell at me for telling you to eat more fiber. So the other problem with supplements is that we're losing the synergistic effect of nutrients in food. And we've talked about this before in different topics anytime supplements come up. There is something about the synergy of all of those different nutrients together in food that provides more benefit to us than just taking those nutrients individually in capsule or pill form. So we would love for you to get your prebiotics from food, and it's easier to gradually increase your fiber intake from food. It's hard to overdose on high fiber foods all at one time. So if you can gradually add more high fiber foods into your diet, that helps your gut adjust to that extra fiber, and it helps minimize some of those pesky side effects. Probiotics are different from prebiotics. So probiotics are actually the live active cultures, the good bacteria. And so in eating probiotic foods or taking probiotic supplements, you are introducing more good bacteria into your gut. And then the prebiotics are kind of the food for the probiotics. That's kind of an easier way to think about it. Again, we would rather you get probiotics from food. There are plenty of food sources of probiotics. Fermented foods like kefir, yogurt with live active cultures. It's important to say that not all yogurt automatically is a probiotic. It needs to have live active cultures in it. Pickled vegetables, tempeh, miso, those are both soy food products, kombucha, kimchi, sauerkraut, all of those are kind of fermented or pickled foods to provide the probiotics. You can get probiotics in supplement form. I'm sure you've all seen them. They are unregulated as supplements. And there has been actually a lot of research showing that many of those probiotic supplements do not always contain the amount of live active cultures that are advertised on the box. The other issue is that there's a lot of conflicting research about the actual benefit of probiotic supplements. So in generally healthy children, adults with functioning GI tracts, the research has not really shown a lot of benefit to adding those probiotics. We haven't really seen a big change in the gut microbiome from taking those probiotic supplements. The few areas where probiotics may be beneficial is where the microbiome maybe isn't at its best. So in older adults, where the microbiome is maybe not as robust, during or after antibiotic use, because antibiotics tend to wipe out all of the gut flora, good and bad. And so then taking those probiotics would help put some good bacteria back into the gut. Or after exposure to pathogens that may have caused some severe diarrhea, taking probiotics can help limit the severity of that potentially. There are other influences to the microbiome besides diet. Sleep is actually a possible influencer. So poor sleep may alter the gut microbiome. The method is still unknown. And on the flip side, an imbalanced microbiome may also create poor sleep. So it's really important not just to eat a healthy diet high in fiber, but to also make sure that you have good sleep hygiene, that you're getting adequate sleep every night. Artificial sweeteners, not carcinogenic. The research has not shown them to be cancer causing, but they may alter the gut microbiome. So our cells, our human cells, do not metabolize artificial sweeteners. But some research is suggesting that the microbiota in your gut might digest those sweeteners. And again, some studies in mice showed alterations in the microbiome in the group of mice that were fed artificial sweeteners. They ended up with fewer beneficial bacteria. The same thing was not seen in the group of mice that were just fed regular sugar water. Now, we talked about human studies. The same results have not necessarily translated in human studies. So they have had some mixed results with the effect on the microbiome, that decreasing of the diverse beneficial bacteria not being seen in every person who had artificial sweeteners, who consumed artificial sweeteners. And there's not really a good answer yet as to why some people's microbiomes were affected and some were not. So again, still being studied. Is that, how many times have I said that now? I said it would be 5, but we'll see. We talked about the ongoing research, number 6. The NIH Human Microbiome Project started in 2007. And the research now spans over 20 of the NIH institutes and centers. So NIH, for anyone who doesn't know, National Institutes of Health. So that research is meant to help characterize the microbiome. So to really figure out what it is, the genomes of all those different microorganisms, how they interact, and to help analyze the microbiome's role in our health and disease. So how it really affects our health and disease. So there are tons of studies. Angie and I were talking at the beginning of this, before we got started, that from what I could tell, a lot of the studies currently were focusing on pregnancy, I think preterm labor even, diabetes and blood sugar control. So that's potentially a lot of really interesting information that's coming down the pipe. I also found, this is a mouthful, so bear with me, the AGA FMT National Registry. So the AGA is the American Gastroenterological Association, all right? And FMT stands for fecal microbiota transplantation. And it is exactly what it sounds like. So the procedure uses donor stool, unknown donor stool, and it is delivered into a human via colonoscopy most of the time as a transplant, so trying to alter or improve the gut microbiome via fecal transplant. The goal right now is to try to treat or cure recurrent C. diff infections. But the question is, does FMT increase the risk of developing other medical conditions long term? What is the effect of doing this long term, essentially? So this national registry was established in 2016, again through NIH. And the goals were to assess the short and long-term outcomes of those transplants. So the ultimate goal is to track over 4,000 patients over a 10-year period of time. And they just recently released data on the first 259 patients between 2017 and 2019 that were seen and transplanted between 2017 and 2019. So they're up to about 500 patients or close to 500 patients now, but this is just the initial data release. So of that group, 222 participants returned for a 1-month follow-up, for a 1-month follow-up. And then of that number, of the 222 participants, they saw a 90% cure rate of the C. diff infections. There were 2 post-procedure infections, not C. diff, but just kind of general infections, possibly related to the actual transplant procedure. And then the recurrence of a C. diff infection within 6 months of the transplant was found in 4% of the participants, of that 222 participants. And again, they are continuing to follow these participants over a 10-year period to really assess the long-term safety and or any consequences of altering a person's gut microbiome with these transplants. So I just thought that was fascinating. I know it sounds weird to, to do that kind of a transplant, but when you think about what they're trying to accomplish, to me, it really is incredibly interesting.